Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming in a new Diablo 4 video. Today it's finally time for me to talk about the power rankings. With the launch underway, it's been roughly 1 week since early access and already we have a world first winner for all three main categories. This means someone has reached level 100 in softcore, another in hardcore, and then the last true solo in hardcore. The race has been really fun to see and watch, and while I've personally pushed hard to progress and create content that I hope would be useful, compared to those guys I'm only level 70. But how does this relate to power rankings, meaning the classes compared and stacked up against each other? Well, it's very telling of the relevancy of each class and its strengths and weaknesses, suggesting which is the best class overall and which might be the weakest. The truth is, each class is more than capable in all content. In group or solo or whatever, a complete build on any class is going to be very strong. But not all classes are created equal, and some are very clearly better than others. With the race complete, we can take a look at those classes and consider how they all compare. On that note, if you want to improve your Diablo experience with an easy way to track and follow builds, Mobalytics, today's sponsor, is a fantastic resource for exactly that. An application I've been using on and off for years for a variety of games, and it's now here in Diablo 4. It's a very easy way to follow meta builds and maximize your gameplay. Mobalytics is a completely free companion app designed to make your experience smoother in your game of choice, as a straightforward way to check builds, find guides, consider tier lists, and more. Best of all, for Diablo 4, it can be easily accessed mid-game in just a moment through the in-game overlay. You just press Tab plus Q, and that will push the overlay out on the left, letting you find a suitable build or guide to follow along while still in-game and moving and playing. It's a very efficient way to say, when leveling, pull out the overlay and just check your guide and what to level next without really any interruption. Or check the main app itself to check extra details where there's space for the creators to explain how the build works, advise you on the gameplay loop, and even link to full video guides should you need them. All of the builds can be filtered by class and are constantly updated according to current meta. Further, Mobalytics is celebrating the launch of Diablo 4 with a giveaway. Anyone who downloads the app is automatically entered into the drawing for these potential prizes. You could win the statue of Inarius, the statue of Lilith, and even collector's editions of the game. So give the app a try, potentially win some prizes. Just follow the link in the description of this video so they know we sent you. A big thank you again to Mobalytics for sponsoring the channel, but now let's get back to the video. This is the front page of the community-driven website d4race.com, which has been tracking the progress of the fastest levelers in all three categories. As you can see at the top here, we have our winner, Rob, aka Rob2628, who claimed rank 1 first place as a Barbarian. Rob was also one of the creators in the pre-release press and creator version of the game, in which he also hit level 100, so that knowledge and practice clearly came into play, alongside obviously a lot of determination and dedication. Apparently, this took Rob 54 hours and 30 minutes in total, and he slept for just 8 hours in that time, which is insane. Meanwhile, we have second place Khan here, who was the first to reach level 100 in hardcore mode, and he also did that on a Barbarian. Third up though, in rank 3 here, is the first person to claim hardcore as a solo player, Woodijo, who did not benefit from the safety of friends or the XP benefits of, say, splitting dungeon runs and so on. And thankfully he managed it on something other than a Barbarian, as a rogue. Under that, we have the fourth place, which was indeed a Druid, so nice class variety so far there. If we scroll down the rankings a little bit, you can see how things mix up a little bit more. At fifth place, we have Zizarun as a Sorcerer, and at this point you might be noticing something very important, something important to me as well, as a Necromancer main. No Necromancers on this list until we scroll down to 12th place with Gazi. This ordering of the race winners and which classes they're playing is no accident in my opinion, and this is my cue to start talking about those rankings. Starting from the top, Barbarians. It is no coincidence that it hit number 1 in both softcore and hardcore. It just seems to scale the hardest with complete endgame builds. It was indeed largely tied to the now nerfed, and yet still fantastic whirlwind build, massively boosting your health and movement speed, and your resource generation, and damage dealt through shouts, which means you can benefit your friends and allies with those as well. Then of course you would spin to win through whirlwind. That leads to what is easily argued as the easiest gameplay in the game right now. Absolutely shredding damage while moving through packs and bosses too. So yeah, you get to blindly buff up, spin through enemies, devastate whatever enemies are in range, be it AoE or single target or whatever, as long as you've got the fury to keep going. Seemingly, this blind ability to blast through any complications leads to ideal dungeon farm routing and XP per hour as a result, and so racing to the top levels. It says a lot that it won in both softcore and hardcore, in which other players might maybe be careful to be suddenly killed. Barbarians themselves are a moving wall that blasts everything. And again, they're great in group play, where allies can make up for their slower early game experience when they're leveling slower, when they're still working on their abilities and resource generation, where Barbarians take the longest to get a power spike, but they still help the allies that are helping them in the early game with war cries, and then steadily become outrageously strong as the leveling process reaches 50 plus and into the Paragons. And while Barbarians might be stuck in melee combat, they make up with it with pretty much everything else. To see it win the race, but also in both categories, didn't really surprise me that much. Next for number 2 then, it's Druid. The beloved shapeshifter concept was absolutely abysmal in its first showing back in beta, and as it turns out, much like Barbarian, it makes up for it in its dire early leveling experience with some of the best endgame power around. While it might not be the most mobile class by any stretch, it does feature the most build variety in powerful endgame builds. Where other classes might just have, say, a couple meta options, the Druid just has a ton. You can go Wolf, Bear, Storm, or Earth magic, or do combinations of each, which is how it has the most options. In regards to the race, it's just so insanely tanky compared to the other classes that it makes it a very safe pick when considering something like Hardcore, and that tankiness allowing them to take on challenges earlier where there is a lot more risk, but you can tank hits that straight up kill, say, my Necromancer without breaking a sweat. Further, their endgame power is tied to damage types, in which they can have it all. You know, they can do overpower, crit, and vulnerability, all in its toolkit, leading to the big number potential when the stars align. And so it's an extremely popular class for good reason, thanks to that variety and long-term fun that it creates. It's good to see them do well in full release and come so high in the race as well, but they're a standout pick and easily top tier at this point when it comes to general normal gameplay, and again, I think that's why they're so popular. Now let's highlight the Rogue. After Wadijo successfully made it to level 100 at an insane pace while in Hardcore completely alone, it's clear this class is relevant and strong, and it's particularly impressive with Rogue's lower health and defensives, and you know, Rogue brings a lot to group play, so doing it solo on top of that is interesting. This was achieved through the Death Trap build, packing enemies onto one spot and then nuking them all into oblivion. The mobility of the class is the highlight for me here though, thanks to the double charges on the long range instant dash, and of course Shadow Step that allows you to target an enemy and instantly teleport behind them. Through those two mechanics, you can fly to and through packs of enemies in and out in a blink constantly. The general mobility of this class, even out of combat, is insane. And it's also a very high APM class, where you're going to need to avoid damage through your movement and control of the enemy and your skill. And that's why it might be considered one of the highest skill classes, and for good reason. It's very high pace. Thanks to the pace and mobility, it's easily one of the best classes for early game leveling. In fact, I would straight up say it's the best for early game leveling. While you're on your way to levels 40 and 50, you will fly past the other classes because you power spike way faster. Things do slow down though in the late game end game because you become quite squishy, and even if your mobility and burst is high, it's up to you to avoid death through your skill. That demands of course more from the player individually, and that could be a concern for some or an inviting prospect depending on the person. Rogue to me seems consistent from the start, mega fast, high APM, all the way to the end, reaching power spikes early and maintaining this steady level of power creep throughout, where other classes like Druid and Barbarian suddenly reach insane heights of power. Rogue doesn't really compete with that, but it does reach its own heights much sooner, and that's limited by the skill of the player, which is appealing. Moving down the list though, we have the closely followed Sorcerer, or Sorcerers, as multiple appear back to back on that leaderboard. This one makes complete sense to me, being close to the top, but not quite reaching the outrageous power levels we see with, say, OG Whirlwind Barbarians. It's an all-rounder, able to handle every situation really well, a very self-sufficient class to say the least. Sorcerer, much like Rogue, has ultra-fast movement potential thanks to its teleport, which while more of a limited cooldown, it becomes more insane in the late game. The teleport is fantastic in all situations, letting you get out where normal movement just can't, letting you overcome obstacles in the open world that other classes just can't. They gotta walk around. As a leveler, it's pretty consistent from start to finish, making its way through every section of the game as a strong contender with builds that aren't exactly unique dependent at all. And like Druid, it features a lot of ways to play thanks to its uniques and the builds they essentially create, taking you down past they open up when you get a drop. Its endgame power ceiling is mega high too, leaning into the lucky hits that skyrocket their potential. But it does have clear negatives. It doesn't exactly bring as much to group play as other classes can, certainly not in the early game, and worse, it can be quite mana crippled until late game where you can address that issue. When it comes to the race then, I think it's logical they're near the top, but just not at the top. But here we are then. My main class, the Necromancer. We knew going in that Necromancer had some serious issues, and the concerns after the beta where they seemed to over-nerf minion builds. That seemed to be true in the launch, sadly, and to see it past the top 10 on the leaderboards there, well, that made total sense to me. Necromancer is a really cool concept, and by no means is this a weak or bad class. It's just talking about the race and comparing to the other classes, it's clearly got issues. We have pretty much zero mitigation abilities built into our kit. Sure, we got lots of healing like blood orbs, but there's just no shields or way to stop incoming damage before it happens. That right there is crucial to why it's dangerous to pick this in hardcore, especially in a race where you're going fast and taking risks. While we do have that incredibly useful Blood Mist, which provides full iframes to avoid nightmare burst or situations where, you know, mitigation or no, you just die. It's a long cooldown, it slows you down, and it's just no way to reduce damage. Further, we have zero mobility options instead of mitigation like other classes like Rogue. We just walk around and dodge like anyone else, and while finding gear definitely helps with that, leaves you falling behind, becoming more and more gear dependent. I will say that during the early leveling, it's fantastic. Its inherent strength in its abilities, reaching say 40 to 50 is no problem. But it's when things actually get tough in the early Nightmare mode, or when you're pushing Torment for the first time, or you're doing higher tiers of Nightmare Dungeons, you're at extreme risk of the one-shot. Its builds do have insane potential. It's strong in both single target and AoE, very fun to play for that reason, great in group play. But we have to acknowledge that as a Necromancer, most powerful builds have you sacrifice your minions and not use them, which sucks. The buff has come in now to help minion builds work a bit better, they're feeling better, but it's way too late for the race, obviously, and potentially still not enough of a buff in general. I find it a class that's heavily gear dependent when it comes to defenses and survivability, but once you get those things in the late game, it starts to feel really good. I think it does great in the early game, it struggles in the mid game, and it's great in the end game. Compared to each other, Necromancer feels like it needs a bit more love to compete. It's still my main class, whatever current power rankings might be, and I do believe they're going to address it and improve it over time. But there you have it. That is the race to world first and how it helps contextualize the classes and their current power and weaknesses. I'd say Barbarian and Druid are easily competing for the strongest endgame class right now, with Rogue and Sorcerer also fighting just below that. Easily, Necromancer stands below them all overall though, but again, it feels fantastic to me and I trust them to iron out the issues soon. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.